We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the member for Casey.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and welcome, Jack. It's good to have you here. And my question is to the Minister for Housing. $100,000 has been wiped off the value of homes in Melbourne's Mount Waverley in the last 90 days. Minister, how many homeowners in your electorate of Hotham are now in negative equity?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thank you so much, Speaker. And Speaker, the member for Casey asked me about the impact of the landmark housing tax reforms that our government has undertaken on our housing market in this country. Speaker, we have made very significant changes to housing taxation in this country, and we've done that because we recognise that home ownership is the most important aspiration of most Australian families. Now, what the member for Casey has left out of his question, Speaker, is the fact that these changes will lead to a reverse of 10 years of decline of the home ownership rate in our country. Speaker, 75,000 households who are today stuck in a rent trap are going to get access to their own home because of these policies. Now, Speaker, isn't it just so fascinating that those opposite have taken the first question of this question time today when we have the young leaders of our country gathered up here in the gallery?
The Minister will pause and just resume her seat. The Manager on a point of order.
Yeah, it goes to relevant, Speaker. And you said on the 27th of March 2024 the Minister was asked a specific question. She's not entitled to then start talking about broad portfolio issues. She will need to keep her answer efficient to the question. It's got nothing to do with the opposition. It's to do with negative equity. It's to do with negative equity. And she's not even listening.
The Manager has raised his point of order. The Minister was asked a fairly specific question about one area and also her own electorate, so she's going to have to make the answer relevant to the question that she was asked. The Manager is correct. She wasn't asked about opposition policy. To be fair to the Minister, she hasn't gone into opposition policy. She was talking about the question she was asked, so a bit of a jump there before because she was just saying she was asked about, and that's when you took the point of order. So the point of order of relevance is taken, but she won't be able to talk about opposition policy. If she does, I'll sit her down and we'll move to the next question. The Minister has the call.
Thank you so much, Speaker. And I was asked about house prices in my electorate and around Australia. And I say again to those opposite, Speaker, when are they going to stop and listen to what our country is telling us about what's gone wrong for housing in Australia? The reason that we have taken this significant step to address issues in our housing market is for the benefit of the young people who are sitting today in the public gallery, Speaker. Now, I say respectfully to those on the other side of the chamber that house prices have gone up 400% in the last 25 years in our country. 400%. At what point are those opposite willing to accept that we have a significant problem with housing in our country? And if we allow this to continue for another generation, then opportunity and aspiration in our country are going to mean something fundamentally different. Now, Speaker, I'll just finish by saying this. I was raised in an incredibly patriotic household, and I was raised to believe that the most important thing about our country is that it was equal and fair. That is changing about our nation because of our broken housing market, Speaker. We've got home ownership rates for young people falling through the floor. A low-income young couple is half as likely to own their own home in Australia today than they were in the year that I was born, and they want to do absolutely nothing about it. Well, we have a different view, Speaker. We represent all Australians, especially those young people in the gallery. The Minister will conclude her answer. She's not being relevant to the question. Resume your seat. We're moving to the next question. Ministers have to also follow the standing orders, and when I give an instruction or advice to the House not to talk about the opposition, that means don't talk about the opposition. Member Griffith has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and a warm welcome to Grace. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working to strengthen and defend Australia's world-leading superannuation system? What threatens these objectives?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, thank you very much for the fantastic member for Griffith. The best member Griffith has had for some time since Kevin Rudd, it must be said. It's fantastic. And Labor built universal superannuation. Labor has strengthened it, and Labor will always defend it.
Order.
In our first term, we legislated the objective of super because we believe that Australians deserve dignity in their retirement. Then we took the superannuation guarantee all the way up to 12%, because you will recall that that was the policy, but it was paused when the coalition won government. We made sure that low-income workers and young Australians can retire with bigger super balances. We delivered a full 6 months of paid parental leave, and then we made sure that superannuation gets paid on top of it, because that was part of addressing the gender gap which was there in retirement incomes between women and men. And we changed the law so that superannuation gets paid on payday. Now, this will make an enormous difference over time for the young people who are in the gallery today. The difference that will make in building up year after year after year will mean that they retire with much stronger balances than they would otherwise. We know also that superannuation has assisted the economy because it provides an investment pool as well, making sure that superannuation is used to maximise the benefits for their superannuants, but also, of course, it provides a really important investment vehicle. Now, this is, of course, the real change, part of the real change that Labor is delivering. But we know that it is at risk because the Liberals, the Nationals and One Nation all want to decimate universal super. Not only do they want to drag Australians back to the past, they want to damage their future as well. And they've made that very clear. Senator Bragg was talking about superannuation and said this: "That's communism. There'll be superannuation for cats and dogs soon." And then he called it one of the biggest public policy failures since Federation. Of course, the Shadow Treasurer has called it a form of economic insanity, he went on at a different time to call it a form of economic social engineering. Well, Senator Hansard has joined in and has said just yesterday, I think the whole system is broken. Has made it very clear. Wants to make it easier to sack workers, but also wants to make it harder.
Give the call to the honourable member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker, and a warm welcome to Archie Mackay. My question is to the Minister for Housing. Minister, why has the number of first home buyers dropped by more than 6% this calendar year?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you so much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Goldstein for his question. Speaker, on average, there have been more first home buyers each and every year under our government than there have ever been under any other government in Australian history. And you know what, Speaker? We're actually really, really proud of that. And one of the main drivers of it, Speaker, is the 5% deposit program. This program has now helped 260,000 Australians get into a home of their own. And, Speaker, of course, those landmark housing tax reforms that we made in the federal budget are going to provide even more opportunity for first home buyers around the country. We'll see 75,000 rental households get into their first home, which will reverse a decade's worth of decline in the home ownership rate. Now, Speaker, I just want to provide a quick contrast with those opposite who want to re-break the housing market. They want to take away first home owner supports.
Order. The member for Isaacs will cease interjecting. The member for Goldstein, a point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. Relevance. It was an extremely tight question, and it didn't ask for alternative proposals, as you would well know.
The Manager.
To the point of order, the Minister just referred to the fact that she was going to contrast, and the concept of ministers being able to compare and contrast has always been allowed.
Order. Order. We'll hear from the Leader. Running commentary.
The member can contrast, but has to contrast in relation to the question, which was a very tight question. This calendar year, how much has first home buyers dropped? That was the question.
Order. Yes. You're both right. The Manager, as Speaker Smith has indicated on the 26th of February 2020, that probably all speakers in the last 20 or 30 years have allowed to compare and contrast briefly. The Minister was on her feet and she was about to compare, so I don't know what the compare and contrast is. So perhaps if we'd waited to hear what that was first to do that. So we're just going to allow her to make sure, if she's doing a compare and contrast, to make sure it's directly relevant to this answer. She can't compare and contrast other topics. She wasn't asked about that. So consistent with previous rulings, we'll allow the Minister to continue and to make sure that she's being directly relevant.
Thank you, Speaker. And I'm just talking about the fantastic new home ownership pathways that have been opened up by our government, Speaker. And I've spoken to some of the numbers that are relevant to this question. But, Speaker, of course, you don't actually need to take my word for it. We all read the newspapers of a Sunday morning, and for the first time in my life, they are peppered with article after article about first-home buyers around the country who are going to auctions and winning, Speaker. And it's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. There's a very simple reason that they're winning auctions, Speaker. For the first time in 25 years, first-home buyers are standing on a level playing field. And, Speaker, I want to remind the public that up until this point, those opposite have engineered a system where the young people of this country have been paying taxes to subsidise the investor next to them to outbid them at auctions every Saturday. And, Speaker, we have brought that system to an end, and we are damn proud to have done it. Now, Speaker, I want to talk to you about, in the electorate of Fraser, a recent sale of a house in Footscray that sold for $817,000. Speaker, the real estate agent said there was, quote, a bit of emotion when the vendors and the buyers met post-auction, as the vendors had bought that as their first home and they were handing it to a young couple who were after their first home. Speaker, in the fantastic member for the electorate of Wills, a three-bedroom townhouse on a converted squash court sold in post-auction negotiations for $810,000 to a first-home buyer. The real estate agent said a lot of first-home buyers walk through this one. There are a lot of buyers around that are first-home buyers. They are the ones that are still moving in a timely manner. Speaker, we're on the side of first-home buyers, and I think we can see from those opposite they are the last man standing, defending the broken housing market in this country. We're making the real change that Australians are asking for on housing.
Call to the honourable member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to give a shout-out to Oliver, who is in the gallery. My question is to the Treasurer. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to strengthen Australia's superannuation system, and what risks have emerged?
Call to the Treasurer.
Very big thank you to the member for Bendigo, Mr Speaker, a champion for working people and their retirement incomes in her community and around the country, and a big thank you to Tenzin as well for being the youth member for Rankin. Mr Speaker, Labor is the party of superannuation. We built it, we are strengthening it, and we will defend it forever from the attacks of those opposite, Mr Speaker. They don't support superannuation because they don't support working people. It's that simple. This side of the House is working around the clock to strengthen the superannuation system, which is the envy of the world. About a quarter of household wealth in this country is super. We've got the fourth biggest pool of retirement income savings in the world, Mr Speaker. 4 decades of universal super at risk from those opposite. And Mr Speaker, in the 4 years we have been in office, we've got the super guarantee to 12%, we've got payday super, we're paying it on paid parental leave, we're lifting member standards, we're putting a lot of effort into strengthening the superannuation system, making it sustainable into the future. And on Wednesday, Mr Speaker, the Assistant Treasurer will be talking about important consumer protections. This side of the House works very hard to strengthen superannuation. Those opposite work around the clock to undermine and diminish it, Mr Speaker. Now, the stakes of the next election will be very high for a number of reasons, but one of those will be the future of superannuation is at stake at the next election. And we know that because in the last week or so, whether it's Senator Bragg or Senator Hume, Senator Canavan, the Leader of One Nation, all of them have made it very clear that if any combination or coalition of Liberals, Nationals and One Nation win the next election, they will end universal superannuation as we know it. They represent the biggest risk to universal super in the 40-year history since it became compulsory, Mr Speaker. They've made it very clear. Equating superannuation for young workers with super for cats and dogs, describing it as economic insanity as the Shadow Treasurer did. The same person who said that people on low and middle incomes could be considered to be taken out of the system entirely, Mr Speaker. This is what they really think about superannuation. And their divisive and dangerous anti-worker and anti-super agenda will leave every Australian worker worse off if they get their hands on superannuation. That is now clear, Mr Speaker. And another thing is very clear. We will always back the working people and wages and retirement incomes of people who work for a living in this country. Those opposite will always attack them. They don't support super because they don't support workers. They've made that now very clear.
Concluded. Before we go to the next question from the crossbench, I've got a number of acknowledgements to go through. It's a busy week this week, so I ask members to bear with me. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the Speaker's Gallery today is Mr Jeremy Hanson, CSC MLA, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly. We also have the Right Honourable John Lord Speller of Smethwick, the United Kingdom's trade envoy to Australia. Welcome, Lord Speller. And also present in the gallery today is representatives of the Australasian Union of Jewish Students who are in Canberra attending their annual political training seminar, and also delegates from Common Grace's annual Let Justice Flow conference, which brings Christian advocates to Parliament House, and also a number of students and leaders and staff from the Islamic College of Brisbane who are visiting Parliament House to learn about more Australia's system of democracy, and Lachlan Hunter MLA, the member for Central Wheatbelt and Shadow Minister for Agriculture. Welcome to you all. Give the call to the honourable member for New England.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Manager of Government Business representing the Minister for the Environment and Water. Now, I've heard today you've been talking about your support for workers, so I put the challenge to you. We have 79 workers at Deniliquin and Leeton who've received their redundancy notice because of the peculiarity that you're unable to credit floodwaters as an environmental flow. This is merely a bureaucratic decision. Do you promise those workers, members of the United Workers Union, that you will change this decision and give them back their jobs before they get flushed down the river?
Give the call to the Leader of the House, representing the Minister for Environment and Water.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Anything that goes to the condition of individual workers in the way that's just been described, and I haven't been briefed on what's been described, but obviously the way the member has put it equates to a significant issue, particularly for those involved. I'm happy to find out about that, get briefed on it and report directly to the member.
Give the call to the honourable member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and a shout-out to Samaya, the youth member for Swan. My question's to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering a stronger, fairer, more secure superannuation system for Australians, and are there any risks to this approach?
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Service.
Speaker, I thank the member for Swan for her question and acknowledge that she has been a champion for superannuation throughout her time in this chamber. She has defended every increase in the superannuation guarantee, every one of which has been opposed tooth and nail by those opposite. The Albanese Labor government believes that all Australians deserve dignity, security and independence in retirement. That's why we're focused on building a superannuation system that is stronger, fairer and more resilient. We believe that a superannuation system that delivers better outcomes for working Australians, not just today but for generations to come. Members in this side believe in superannuation. We are members of a party that built superannuation. Since coming to office, the Albanese Labor government has delivered a comprehensive reform agenda to strengthen retirement outcomes for Australian workers. We have increased the superannuation guarantee to 12%, which will deliver more for retirees. We have increased the low-income superannuation tax offset, boosting the retirement savings of 1.3 million Australian low-income workers, and including around 750,000 women and including around 550,000 Australians under the age of 30. And we have legislated the objective of superannuation for the first time. Australians deserve confidence that their hard-earned savings are protected, and that is exactly what this government will be doing. I'm asked about what risks there are to our system. Speaker, the Liberals, Nationals and One Nation, they might be different political parties, but they have the same old agenda, and they will destroy the superannuation if they get a chance. They share a deeply concerning anti-worker, anti-super agenda that would destroy the economic security and retirement outcomes for millions of Australians. Their long-standing hostility to universal superannuation threatens one of the most important retirement systems in the world. We know that the Shadow Treasurer for a long time has been deeply sceptical about universal superannuation, calling it idiocy. And just last week, Senator Bragg called it one of the biggest public policy failures since Federation. These are not the words of people who are going to support that system or build on it. We know now that Senator Hansard and the member for New England are joining this group, considering options to allow people to take out their retirement savings early. SMC found that a person aged 30 who withdrew $20,000 as part of the COVID-era early release scheme is now expected to retire with around $93,600 less in superannuation. That is an insight into what would happen if those opposite got their hands on the superannuation system. Labor is the party of superannuation. We built it and we continue to strengthen it. The Liberals, Nationals and One Nation are coming after your superannuation, and they will leave you worse off in retirement.
Call to the honourable member for Wide Bay.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The minister has repeatedly refused to say how much taxpayer money has been handed to foreign companies under the Capacity Investment Scheme. Today, we learned that CIS-backed companies have spent nearly $40 billion on so-called social licence commitments, including cash payments, opening ceremonies and Indigenous artworks. Minister, how much money have you handed to foreign investors under the Capacity Investment Scheme?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and the Minister for Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for the question, and I particularly appreciate the notice the opposition gave on the front page of The Australian today, Mr Speaker, which says the coalition on Monday will launch a parliamentary attack on Labor's marquee scheme. I thought it was questions without notice, Mr Speaker, but there you go. You learn something every day. Now, Mr Speaker, I guess, given it's the first time the opposition's asked me a question since April, it's a big deal, and you have to flag it on the front page of the national broadsheet, I suppose, Mr Speaker. It's a big day for the opposition. Now, Mr Speaker,
on my left,
it is the case, Mr Speaker, in keeping with long-standing practice when the government is running an auction, that those auction results are commercial in confidence, Mr Speaker. That was the result. For example, when the then Minister for Energy ran the Ungi scheme, if he had released the documents which showed how many bids had been received, it would have been clear there had been none because no kilowatts were created, Mr Speaker. That would have been a suboptimal result, Mr Speaker, because when you are operating an auction, what you are doing is calling on people to put forward bids. And if you reveal the outcome of those bids, you are undermining the position of the taxpayer. Now, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman criticises the fact that there was community benefit in projects supported by the Capacity Investment Scheme. That is a fundamental difference of approach, because I happen to think that's a good thing. I happen to think that if developers of renewable energy projects in regional Australia provide bill relief and rebates to people in regional Australia, I think that's a good thing.
The manager will pause. The minister was asked a question about involving the capacity investment scheme. He was just referencing the capacity investment scheme and funding that he was asked about. It's going to be very difficult to take the point of order on relevance. So I think everyone was in the room when he heard him say that. The manager on a point of order
goes to relevance. Speaker, the question was how much have you handed to foreign investors under the capacity investment scheme? That was the question. It was a very specific question. You haven't attempted to answer it.
There was a very long question, and it did contain. It wasn't just that. There was other things in the question. Everyone heard the question. So, as I said, the minister was referring to the capacity investment scheme. He was talking about the funding. I appreciate the minister would like a yes/no answer. I can't deliver that, but I will deliver. Sorry, a figure. Okay, a figure. I can appreciate the opposition would like a figure, but as they know, I can't compel the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. But I can't compel the minister to do that under the standing orders. What I can compel him to be is directly relevant, and as I indicated to the House, he has been directly relevant around the question he was asked, and I'll ask him to continue.
Certainly will be, Mr Speaker, because the honourable member referred to community benefits and complained that the community was receiving benefits from these projects. Now, I can confirm that the same FOI document the Coalition received confirmed that there were 65 projects announced that had that point committed to $35.5 billion in Australian and New Zealand local content, including $1.1 billion in local steel. I think that's a good thing. Those opposite think it's a bad thing. And, Mr Speaker, I also make no apologies for some First Nations communities receiving benefits from these programs, including the program in Wellington, which has negotiated 5% equity for local First Nations people, 5% ownership, Mr Speaker, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think is a good thing, and people on this side of the House are proud of, Mr Speaker.
Call to the honourable member for Blair.
Thanks, Speaker. Welcome, Haley from Blair. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering a more secure retirement for working Australians, and what could place this progress at risk?
Call to the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Blair for that question. Of course, as the Treasurer clearly said, it was Labor that created superannuation, and it is Labor that believes in it. And that is why the Albanese government has strengthened our superannuation system to deliver a better retirement for working Australians. And in recognition of the importance of superannuation in retirement, the Albanese Labor government, of course, made superannuation clearly outlined in the Fair Work Act as a workplace right. This recognises that superannuation is critical to a good standard of living in retirement for workers, just as wages are good in their working life. Now, our government has passed legislation to ensure that superannuation is paid at the same time wages are, giving workers better oversight and a bigger balance at retirement. Now, of course, the Albanese Labor government is paying superannuation on government-paid parental leave, improving the economic security of thousands of families in retirement. And it is this Labor government that ensured that the legislated superannuation guarantee rate of 12% was actually achieved. Now, Speaker, I am asked about what could place this at risk. And unfortunately, the biggest risk to hard-working Australians' retirements is those sitting opposite the Liberals, the Nationals and One Nation. Now, of course, we know that the Liberals have never supported superannuation. When they were last in government, they froze the legislated superannuation guarantee for 6 whole years, and they've continually undermined superannuation with their policies of encouraging workers to decimate their retirement savings. And of course, if anyone was wondering about what their position is today, they only have to listen to Senator Bragg, who last week has continued to expose the Coalition's disdain for universal superannuation by saying it was one of the biggest public policy failures since Federation. Although he did continue with this argument in the same speech, where he suggested that paying young workers superannuation was the same as giving super to cats and dogs. I couldn't quite follow that one, but I'm sure he'll explain it in a future press conference. But it's not just the Liberal and National Party that are on a crusade, of course, it's One Nation as well, who have confirmed over the weekend they fundamentally oppose the principle of universal superannuation. It is only Labor, that can be trusted with the retirement savings of millions of Australians, while those opposite would decimate it.
Time has concluded. Call goes to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Minister, would you just cut the crap and tell Australians how much your capacity investment scheme is costing taxpayers?
Order. The Manager.
There may well be a replacement available in the gallery, but that's not representative of how we normally conduct question time.
Yeah. Look, no, I'm going to deal with this. Look, we've all tried to improve standards, or I hope that's the goal of all members of Parliament. We've had some serious incidents, as people know. That sort of language is beneath the dignity of this House. If you wish to say that in your own time and your own capacity, go for it. But while I'm the Speaker, I want certain standards and decorum to be lifted and raised. I'm not happy with that sort of level of disrespect, not to me, but to the Parliament. So I'm tempted to rule the question out and just to move to the next one. But I want this to be a final warning that people cannot use that language in here. It is completely unacceptable. The member for Warringah on the point of order.
In respect to your comments, Mr Speaker, as the Manager of Opposition Business, it's incumbent on him to show respect and show leadership. He should be asked to leave the chamber, and that question is not in order. If we can't set the standards here,
just resume
when will we?
No, resume your seat. No, there is no disrespect for members. The Manager was heard, the Leader was heard. The member for Warringah is going to be shown that same courtesy as well. She's got a right to raise on the point of order. She's done that. So we're going to resume your seat. Resume your seat. We're going to deal with this properly and efficiently and effectively. Members on my right will cease objecting. We're going to reset. I've made my views clear. Just going to ask the Manager to restate the question, use appropriate language and show respect in this House. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Will the Minister just cut the fecal matter and tell Australians how much Labor's secret capacity investment scheme is costing taxpayers?
No, I'm dealing with this. Resume your seat. That is a direct defiance of what I just addressed to the House. The member for Cornwall, I gave him a fair go, and he's completely disrespected me in the House. He'll leave the chamber under 94A, and we will move to the next question. The language must improve. I respect the traditions and conventions of this House, and I want to uphold them. I'm asking all members to do so. Goodness sake. Give the call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker, and welcome Sage, the younger member for Canberra. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. What actions has the Albanese Labor government taken to grow women's super? And what other approaches is the government being asked to consider?
The call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government representing the Minister for Women.
Thanks very much, and a shout-out to Maggie from Ballarat, and apologies for the juvenile behaviour we just saw. Can I thank the member for Canberra for her question, and particularly I want to acknowledge her for the work that she does in this place both advocating for her constituents but also advocating for women, while she balances work and family life. It's a really familiar story. Striking the right balance between work and family is something that families across the country have to do each and every single day. Every family will make the choices that are right for them, and that choice shouldn't come with a financial penalty on top. Caring now shouldn't mean financial insecurity in your retirement. Missing out on super to have kids adds up, and on average, women approaching retirement have 26% less superannuation than men of the same age. That's why the government has reformed the paid parental leave scheme to ensure parents can have more time off and more money. We've also expanded paid parental leave to 6 months, and as of July last year, parents received superannuation on their paid parental leave. It is a crucial reform, and it will matter for women in retirement. It will help close that super gap between Australian men and women. It is great news for families, and it's just one of the ways we're supporting women and their superannuation. We're reforming the low-income super tax offset to support low-income women to save more for their retirement. And we've introduced payday super to support earlier, more frequent employer super contributions. And all of this, of course, builds on the progress that we are making in lifting wages and closing the gender pay gap, now at a historic low of 11.3%. That is how we make sure that women have economic choices and that they can live with dignity in their retirement. Labor built superannuation, and we're strengthening it to ensure that working women are better off in their retirement. But in the last week alone, we know we have seen the Liberals, the Nationals and One Nation again go back to form and threaten the existence of superannuation. They have described superannuation as a loss of liberty. They've confirmed they do not support universal contributions, and they've bragged about their past policies that they would seek to start dismantling the superannuation scheme that would see people with thousands of dollars less in their retirement incomes, and that will particularly affect women. Make no mistake, the Liberals, the Nationals and One Nation have never, ever supported a universal superannuation scheme. They don't support it. They don't like it. They've attempted at every opportunity to undermine it, and if they're given the chance, that is exactly what they will do again. And the people who actually suffer as a result of that will primarily be Australian women on their retirement.
The call to the honourable member for Groom.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Will the minister just tell Australians how much Labor's secret capacity investment scheme is costing taxpayers?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and the Minister for Energy.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for the question, and I recognise Madison from McMahon, Mr Speaker, who is with us in the gallery today. Mr Speaker, the capacity investment scheme is treated in the budget in a very similar way, and in fact identical way, to previous government programs of a similar nature, including programs that were administered by the then Minister for Energy, Mr Speaker, including the underwriting new generation investments, Mr Speaker, including Snowy Hydro 2 business case that the member for Hume was responsible for, including changes to the Clean Energy Regulator that the member for Wannon was responsible for, the Australian Naval Infrastructure that the member for Wannon was responsible for, all of which are noted in Commercial in Confidence in Budget Measures No. 2. But, Mr Speaker, the point is that these projects that are supported by the Capacity Investment Scheme are all designed to bring more of the cheapest form of energy to the availability of Australians. A fact, Mr Speaker, that was recognised, credit where it's due, was recognised by the member for Wannon last week. He issued a press release, and I must say I was touched. I don't get emotional much these days, Mr Speaker, but I was touched. It says the Shadow Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, Dan Tehan, said Labor's net zero agenda was delivering the cheap and affordable energy Australia requires. I mean, so eloquent, Mr Speaker. I was very moved to read it.
The member for Page on point of order.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. The minister now has diverted into a whole lot of topics that has nothing to do with the capacity investment scheme, and I ask him to return to the question.
Answer. Order. Order. We'll give the call to the member for Payne.
Thanks, Speaker. Welcome to Darius from Payne. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering real change for Australian families now and into the future with expanded paid parental leave? What are the risks to this?
To be called to the Minister for Social Services.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker, and thanks so much to the member for Bean for his question. More than 2,000 parents in his electorate benefited from paid parental leave last year. And as the Minister representing the Minister for Women pointed out, paying superannuation on paid parental leave is one of the most important ways that we can end that retirement income gap that has been so prevalent in Australia for so many years. Mr Speaker, there is a big difference between those opposite and those on this side when it comes to super. We want people to have more when they retire, and you want people to have less when they retire. When it comes to paid parental leave, we have increased paid parental leave since coming to government in 2022 to almost $30,000 for that paid parental leave. It's more than double what it was in 2022. And for the last year, just over a year, we've been also paying superannuation on top of that. And I released figures today, Mr Speaker, that in that first year of paying paid parental leave on superannuation, paying superannuation on paid parental leave, 200,000 people have benefited to the tune of $285.5 million. Now, this is a huge difference for those mums when they retire. So, if you've got a woman with a median superannuation balance, she would be about $5,400 better off in retirement because of the change that we've made. So let's just take a fictional example. Let's call her Rachel. She's 25. She goes on to have 3 children. She takes paid parental leave for each of those children. Because of our changes, paying superannuation on top of that paid parental leave, Rachel could retire with an extra $17,600 in retirement. That's the difference that we're talking about, Mr Speaker. One Nation have made it clear they want people to have less money in retirement. The Liberals have made that clear. They want people to have less in retirement. The Nationals have made it clear that they want people to have less money in retirement. We, on the other hand, are delighted that not only are we dealing with the gender pay gap, not only are we helping mums when they take time off work to look after their precious new babies, but we are not condemning them to poverty in retirement as well. Welcome, Kaylin.
The call to the honourable member for Mackellar.
Welcome to Miller from Mackellar. My question is to the Minister for Health, Disability and the NDIS. During the recent Senate inquiry, there were extensive warnings from disability advocates and state ministers that alternative foundational supports are not ready, fully funded or guaranteed to be operational before participants are moved off the scheme. Understandably, parents and carers are terrified that their kids could be left without the supports they need and rely on. How will the government ensure that no NDIS participant is exited from the scheme until appropriate foundation supports are fully funded and operational?
Excellent question.
The call to the Minister for Health and the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you to the member for Mackellar, and thank you to Zoe for representing Adelaide's western suburbs up in the southern Speaker's Gallery. Well, the way we'll ensure that is by making sure foundational supports are agreed by the 1st of January 2028. That is the agreement that all jurisdictions made with the Prime Minister through their heads of government, the Premiers and the Chief Ministers. This is not something that came out of the blue earlier this year. It was a decision of National Cabinet back in 2023 to accept and endorse the core recommendations of the NDIS review that Bruce Bonahady and Lisa Paul conducted back then, one of which, a central recommendation of which, was to build that second tier of disability supports that was always envisaged by the Productivity Commission when recommending that our government back then put in place an NDIS. The tragedy is that wasn't put in place, those second-tier supports. Many of them did pre-exist the NDIS, as the member knows, and were either dismantled entirely by state governments or at least degraded to a significant degree. Now, back in 2023, when heads of government were making that decision, there was also a commitment for $10 billion, half funded by the Commonwealth, half collectively by states and territories, to fund those what were called foundational supports as recommended by the NDIS review. As the member knows, Thriving Kids is well underway. I've seen implementation plans, I think, by all state governments, with the exception of Queensland. We're very satisfied with progress being made there. They will start to ramp up from the 1st of October, with the expectation that they will be fully rolled out from the 1st of January 2028, when access and eligibility rules change for that cohort, which, as the member knows, is children under the age of 9. Now, for other participants or potential participants who would not satisfy the new substantially reduced functional capacity test that is currently being developed by the Technical Advisory Group, and I had my second meeting with them the week before last, yes, foundational support systems will have to be built for them as well, kids over the age of 9 and adults who might not end up being on the NDIS as a result of that new test being introduced, and there's a lot of work for state governments and the Commonwealth to do there. We're committed to doing that work. The Minister for the NDIS, Senator McAllister, met with her Disability Minister colleagues again on Friday. That was reaffirmed as an agreed commitment by all state governments. Now, I understand people are nervous about these changes. I understand that they are significant changes about which we've had very constructive discussions with the opposition, which I want to acknowledge right now. And there's a lot of work to do, but we are absolutely committed to doing that. And as the Prime Minister and I have made clear, obviously we will not let Australians fall between two stools without proper supports, but we will have them in place by the 1st of January.
The call to the Chief Government Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. And through you, I'd like to welcome Bodie from Lalor and address a question to the Minister for Housing. How is the Albanese Labor government helping to deliver security and stability by helping to deliver security and stability for Australians into a home of their own? Is the Minister aware of any risks to this work?
The call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thanks so much, Speaker. I acknowledge my friend Grisha, who's from Hotham and up in the public gallery, and I also thank the member for Lalor for her question. Speaker, you're not going to believe this. Almost 6,500 of her constituents have gotten into their first home with the support of our government. And I want everyone she represents to know that she's in this parliament every day fighting for first home buyers to get the fair opportunities that they deserve. Speaker, our government delivered a big housing budget in May. $2 billion for last-mile infrastructure to build 65,000 more homes, and landmark tax reforms to make our housing market fairer for every Australian. Labor believes that secure housing is the foundation of a decent life in this country. So is security in retirement. Speaker, an Australian should not have to choose between the two. But increasingly, that is what those opposite are trying to force Australians to do. Now, Speaker, if there is one truth emerging today in Australian politics, it is this. The Coalition cannot govern this country alone. The numbers just simply aren't there. Their only pathway back into government is in some kind of coalition with One Nation. But instead of these parties pulling each other towards sensible solutions, what we increasingly see them do is chase each other down these extremist rabbit holes. And we see this in housing, Speaker.
The Minister will pause the manager on a point of order.
Yes, Speaker, on relevance, as you say, the compare and contrast or the risk can be about the policy she's talking about, not going down rabbit holes, as she said, to completely irrelevant things.
Yes, the Minister was asked about risks to the policy question that she was asked for about secure and stable housing. So just going to make sure that she's covering that part of the compare and contrast, not a general topic.
So, Speaker, we are increasingly seeing this prevail in our debate about housing. The Liberals have said they want Australians to raid their super to buy a home. Now, I remind the parliament this is an idea that Sol Eslake said was the worst public policy idea in 60 years in our country. And now we've got Pauline Hanson getting on the same train. Now, Speaker, Australians are really smart about housing and they know exactly what these policies will do. They will push house prices even higher. They will create a massive wealth transfer from the young people of our country to the older generation that own the most property wealth, and they'll leave so many Australians without much super in their retirement. But what's worse, Speaker, is that those opposite are basically saying they're not even going to try to fix our broken housing market. Instead, they'll leave a broken system in place and ask Australians to raid their retirement to try to survive it. Speaker, it is not the job of Australians to pay for a broken housing system by trashing their retirement. It is the job of this parliament to change our broken housing system, and that's exactly what our government is doing. Speaker, Australians deserve housing security and they deserve retirement security. The Coalition and One Nation are going to make you sacrifice one to get the other. Labor is going to protect both.
Call to the honourable member for Riverina.
Shout out to Matilda as she leaves the gallery, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. Minister, more than 20 veterans and family members are in Parliament House today. They're in the gallery as I speak, to raise their concerns about your broken promise to impose a $5,000 cap on veterans' allied health services. Minister, these veterans have travelled to Parliament to be heard. Why have you refused to meet them? What or who could possibly be more important?
Call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. I will give a shout-out to Alicia, who's the representative for Burke for the National Youth Parliament.
Order.
Now, it's completely unclear to me about what the promises element of the question that was made, Mr Speaker, but what is really important about what we are doing when it comes to allied health is about making it easier for our veteran community to be able to access allied health services, because we have been hearing for a very long time that providers have been cutting back on providing these services or threatening to cut back on these services because of the fees paid to them. And so we have committed nearly $170 million to make the biggest increase in fees being paid to allied health service providers in 20 years. Now, this is incredibly important. Now, we're matching that with removing the burdensome 20-session allied health treatment cycle where veterans have to continually go back to see a GP to get a new referral every 12 sessions. As part of that, we're replacing that with an initial $5,000 threshold. And as part of moving to that $5,000 threshold, we have committed to engaging with the veteran community to make sure that that works as seamlessly as possible. And I've been engaging with the veteran community, with ex-service organisations and with the practitioners that deliver that support. We're in the process of finalising a discussion paper to be able to deliver that consultation process.
Order. The member for McHugh and the Minister will pause. The member for Riverina on a point of order.
My point of order is on relevance. I asked why won't the Minister meet these veterans today?
The Minister was asked a specific question. He'll need to confine his remarks to the question, giving him some latitude, but he'll have to be short in his response.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We're in the process of putting together a discussion paper that will be released for broad consultation with the veteran community. As I informed those people who wish to meet with me.
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Order.
Mr Speaker, I thought they wanted an answer to the question.
Minister can come to his conclusion.
As they were informed last week by my office, I was unable to meet with them today. But as I have continually said and engaged with many ex-service organisations, we wish to engage with them and the practitioners in allied health services to make sure that we deliver a service that is available with no gap in service to allied health while they are accessing the clinically required allied health services that are required. We want to improve this access by paying allied health service providers more, by making it easier for veterans to access without having to continually go back to a GP, and we will continue to engage with the veteran sector, and I'm sure as part of those engagements, those people that have visited today will participate in providing that feedback and engaging in the consultation forums that we will be running so that we get these reforms right. And if the opposition continue to want to shout, instead of actually engaging in the policy development process, it's incredibly unhelpful to getting those positive outcomes.
The Minister's time has concluded. Order. Call to the Honourable the Member for Riverina on a point of order.
I just seek leave to table the Minister's letter of refusal to meet with those heroes.
The Manager. Good call to the Member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. How is the Albanese Labor government progressing the gun buyback scheme to help keep people safe? What other approaches have been advanced in recent days?
Call to the Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Bennelong for raising the issue. After the appalling anti-Semitic terror attack which occurred in Bondi, we had a special sitting of this House, an emergency sitting of this House, where we took action to act on both the motivation and the method that was used in that attack. And the Royal Commission, in its interim report, called for the Commonwealth and states to be implementing the buyback scheme. The government has provided to all the states and territories now, to all jurisdictions, a flexible system to allow them, because they've all implemented, or most of them have implemented in slightly different ways, but a flexible system to allow them to participate in the buyback. Effectively, once any state is part of the buyback, they can then choose to include what the price points are, what ammunition, accessories, dealer compensation would be, and wherever that lands, within their compensation model, the cost is shared 50-50 with the Commonwealth. Phase 2 of the New South Wales buyback scheme, for example, which starts in early 2027, will provide a pathway to compensation for eligible higher-value firearms with an indicative market value above $3,000. Now, I respect that when we established the buyback scheme, it was not bipartisan across the parliament. And part of what didn't surprise me was that there would be a private member's bill in the Senate that would look at undoing this. But what stunned me, absolutely stunned me, with the private senator's bill that is in the Senate right now, moved by Senator McKenzie, which I presume has the support of the National Party, the Liberal Party and One Nation, is it doesn't just go against the aspects of the government's changes that deal with the number of firearms and the firearms that were used at Bondi, because we all accept and we all know that the majority of gun owners are responsible people who use firearms for work, for sport and for recreation. But I'll tell you what stuns me is that legislation in the Senate right now, supported by all three of those parties, calls for the undoing of the restrictions we did on 3D printed weapons. Now, these are the weapons where, if you get the software and the files, you can print firearms at home without regulation. Something which is, I thought, only supported by organised crime. I thought only supported by the worst elements of our society. And to think there is right now on the notice paper in the Senate a piece of legislation that would undo that says everything about who that crowd are trying to appeal to.
Call to the member for Warringah.
And thank you to Gemma from Warringah for representing us. To the Treasurer. Migrants fill critical workforce shortages across Australia, including doctors, nurses, agriculture, aged care, childcare and construction, where migrants can make up to 30% or more of the workforce. What modelling has Treasury done on the economic and productivity damage from cuts to skilled migration and working holiday makers, and which sectors or essential services would need to be scaled back due to workers' shortages?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And to the honourable member, I want to thank her for the serious and considered way that she comes at this really important part of public policy in this country, and that is about migration and its contribution to the economy. For a really long time now in this country, migrants have made an essential contribution, not just to our economy but to our society as well. And it's not always been the case that that's been recognised by everyone in this parliament, but it's recognised by this side of the parliament, and I believe that it's recognised in that part of the parliament as well. There is a lot of work that goes into ensuring that we're making the most of the economic benefit provided by migration. The Treasury has, the Centre for Population, the Productivity Commission's done a bunch of work, the OECD has, the Reserve Bank and others. And the consistent conclusion of all of that work over time is that migrants are more likely than not to make a big contribution to our economy. Often they provide a big part of the dynamism and the innovation in our economy. I know that the Small Business Minister, who I engage with on this regularly, understands that truth, that so much of the innovation, creativity and dynamism, which is all about productivity, comes from migrant communities as well. And so our job, the responsibility that we embrace, is to make the most of that economic opportunity, fed by that considered, methodical analysis that we get from all of those places, to make sure we're making the most of this opportunity. At the same time as we get net overseas migration down 45% below its peak, and with some further distance to travel as well. Now, I'm conscious that the honourable member asked about the damage done to our economy if we go about managing the migration system in the wrong way. And we have unfortunately heard in recent times in particular that there are some in our community, and especially in our politics sitting over there, whose primary purpose when it comes to thinking about and dealing with migration in this country is to try and divide the community. And we reject that irresponsible approach. The approach that they take in talking down our economy and dividing our community is bad for our economy, and it's bad for our society as well. And so we will continue to work with anyone of goodwill who recognises you can get net overseas migration down, as we are doing, at the same time as you can recognise and not diminish the really important role played by migrants in our economy and in our society as well.
Call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How are the government's reforms supporting young people to get into home ownership? What impact are they having on housing supply? Is there any opposition to this policy?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Reid for her question, and I thank her for welcoming me to 5 Dock yesterday to Ferragosto, a celebration, of course, of the Italian-Australian community commemorating, of course, the ascension into heaven of the Virgin Mary. That is an important event in Italy, and one of the great things about our multicultural Australia is that we get to celebrate events that are held right around the world, right here in Australia, in the Australian way. The Labor government is delivering real change through our $47 billion Housing Australia plan. We have more first home buyers than we've ever seen before. Over 490,000 loans issued to first home buyers under Labor. And the important thing is that young people are getting a fair crack. At auctions around Australia on Saturday, unlike what was previously happening, young people could go and they weren't competing against investors seeking to use negative gearing. And they were getting access into their own home. That was the objective, because the primary purpose of housing is to get a roof over people's heads. That is the primary purpose of housing, and that is being achieved by young people right around the country. But I'm also asked about what the impact is on supply, because what we have done is to make sure if you want to participate in negative gearing, you still can. But the difference is you will not only be investing in your future and your future assets, you'll be investing in the nation by investing in a new build. And, Mr Speaker, the figures released by the ABS last Friday show that it is working. In the June quarter, there was a 27% increase in investor loans for new builds. 27%. And a 20% increase for construction loans. Now, there are a few people who know about building in Australia, like Harry Triggerboff and others, who are all saying this is having a positive impact on new builds. And that is why the policy was designed that way, very deliberately, to separate out first home buyers and people to give them a fair crack, but at the same time to boost supply along with the other measures that we have in place that are boosting supply, including through the Housing Australia Future Fund, including through the build-to-rent scheme. All these measures aimed at boosting supply in this country are making a difference. On that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.